I'd like to welcome all of you and commend you for taking the decision to attend this highly significant rally. All the more so because the situation facing Julian Assange and our efforts to defend him have been subjected to an ongoing media blackout supported by the entire political establishment, not only in Australia, but around the world. My name is Linda Tenenbaum. I'm a member of the National Committee of the Socialist Equality Party, and I'll be chairing today's event. At the outset, I'd like to send the warmest greetings on behalf of everyone here today to journalist Julian Assange and his colleagues in WikiLeaks. Our greetings also go to journalists and workers in every country who are fighting government, military intelligence and corporate efforts to suppress their democratic rights and intimidate them into silence. For the past 12 years, Assange and his media organisation WikiLeaks have provided the means for whistleblowers to expose the real nature and extent of imperialist criminality. Government lies, censorship and deceit, horrific war crimes and their cover-up, and at immense personal cost, defied all attempts at intimidation and threats aimed at stopping the ongoing flow of explosive information. In recent weeks, Julian's persecution has intensified. All his communications have been cut off in what is an act of pure vindictiveness. Just imagine what his life has been like. Stuck in a tiny room for the past 6 years with no access to fresh air or sunlight, with a host of medical conditions for which he has been denied any treatment. He can't reach for his mobile phone and speak to his friends when he wakes up in the morning, or send them a text message. He can't walk outside in the sunshine. He is a journalist who has no access to a computer, to information, to social media, to the outside world. Now he faces the imminent threat of being driven out of the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he was granted political asylum in 2012 as his only alternative to being extradited to Sweden and then on to the United States. If he is forced to leave the embassy now, the British government will arrest him and jail him and then prepare his extradition to the United States, where he will likely face grand jury charges of espionage which carry the death penalty. We have organised this rally to begin the fight to build a powerful defence campaign in Australia, New Zealand and internationally that will bring together all those committed to democratic rights. The right of journalists to inform the population, their right to freedom of speech, and the right of everyone to be informed. These are issues of the most fundamental character. The suppression of the truth of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange goes hand in hand with the destruction of democratic rights. That is why we welcome the support and participation of everyone here, and all those to whom we must now reach out who are committed to the fight for democratic rights. We encourage discussion, debate and the exchange of views with everyone and anyone who agrees with this. Today, this rally is demanding of Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull's government that it act. We're demanding of Malcolm Turnbull's government that it act urgently and immediately to secure Julian Assange's release. We are demanding that the Australian government uses its diplomatic power and legal discretion under both international and Australian law to insist that Britain allow Julian to return to Australia unharmed and unimpeded and with a transparent guarantee against extradition to the United States. In the cases of both Peter Grester, the Australian Al Jazeera journalist who was jailed in Egypt for reporting the truth of the situation in that country, and David Hicks, the Australian imprisoned in Guantanamo Bay under false claims that he was a terrorist, the Australian government utilised its diplomatic powers to secure their release and repatriation. Why not Julian Assange? Because he is being punished for lifting the veil of state secrecy, for revealing the reality of war and the terrible crimes committed in its name, for disabusing hundreds of millions of workers and young people around the world of their naive and dangerous illusions in governments, political parties and politicians. No less than 5 countries, Australia, Sweden, the United States, Britain and now Ecuador, have been involved in the conspiracy to silence Assange and extradite him to the United States. All of them have trashed his democratic right to freedom of speech and the democratic rights of his audience to hear, see and read what WikiLeaks has published. Julian Assange is an Australian citizen, and as such, he has definite democratic rights. But Turnbull and every one of his parliamentary colleagues are cowards. They stand for nothing. They will have to be forced to act in Assange's defence by the power of the unified movement for democratic rights that we are initiating here. Our first speaker, James Corbyn, beside me here, is the National Secretary of the Socialist Equality Party. Over the past weeks, James has led the campaign for this rally, above all by writing for the World Socialist website regular articles and statements on the increasingly perilous situation confronting Julian Assange and the perspective that must animate the struggle for his defence. Please give James your very warm welcome.
Today's rally is part of an international struggle to secure the freedom of Julian Assange, to defend WikiLeaks and to fight against all forms of censorship and the attacks on an independent and critical media. It is a crucial struggle for the working class because it is part of the greater struggle for all of the social and democratic rights of the vast mass of humanity. Internationally, we live in days where a powerful mass movement of workers is developing. After decades in which workers have been suppressed, they are coming forward in powerful waves of strike action and political protest against the assault on their wages, their health care, their education and their right to a healthy and safe environment. Workers and young people are also becoming increasingly aware of the danger of war in these times when an American president speaks casually about using nuclear weapons to totally destroy entire countries. You cannot understand the determination of the American ruling elite and its state to silence WikiLeaks and silence Julian Assange without an understanding of their fear of the working class and the ordinary people.
The US is Israel.
They are terrified of the power that the internet provides to the working class. It gives them the ability to access alternate analysis, alternate news, the ability to exchange information, exchange opinion, and it enables them to unite and organise across national borders. Julian Assange explained this very well in the statement he sent to our publication, the World Socialist website, endorsing an online forum that the WSWS held on January 16th this year. Julian Assange wrote, "Well, the internet has brought about a revolution in people's ability to educate themselves and others. The resulting democratic phenomenon has shaken existing establishments to their core. Google, Facebook and their Chinese equivalents, who are socially, logistically and financially integrated with existing elites, have moved to re-establish discourse control." Now, the means by which the ruling elites are seeking to re-establish discourse control, referred to by Julian, is by trying to destroy the hard-won democratic rights of the working class and to silence and censor the internet. Julian Assange and WikiLeaks are one of the principal oppositional voices in the world today. He is being persecuted by the US, British and Australian governments because they are hostile to everything that WikiLeaks represents. From its establishment in 2006, the mission of WikiLeaks was to provide whistleblowers who had knowledge of criminal conduct by governments, state agencies and corporations, to provide them the means to let you know about it. WikiLeaks guaranteed that leaks would be published without fear or favour, without vetting, and through the power of the internet made available to the entire world. As most of you know, in 2010, WikiLeaks was entrusted by a courageous whistleblower in the US military who wanted to let the world know the full extent of the crimes that were being committed against the people of Afghanistan and the people of Iraq. Tens of millions around the world watched in horror and outrage the collateral murder video published by WikiLeaks, which showed the US helicopter gunship massacring unarmed civilians, including 2 Reuters journalists. WikiLeaks was further entrusted by that whistleblower to publish hundreds of thousands of US diplomatic cables, which reveal how American diplomats around the world engage every day in sordid anti-democratic intrigues to assert the US strategic interests and the profit interests of American companies. Chelsea Manning, formerly Private Bradley Manning, spent close to 7 years of his life in a prison cell for making those courageous leaks, which WikiLeaks published. In this country, we learnt from those diplomatic cables that an entire cabal within the Australian Labor Party government were what the US Embassy classifies as its, quote, protected sources. That is, the people who keep Washington informed and do Washington's bidding. The people identified as US operatives in the Labor Party were those who played the key factional role in ousting Kevin Rudd as Prime Minister, including current Labor Party leader Bill Shorten. The Obama administration wanted Rudd out because he wouldn't line up fast enough with the US build-up preparations for a military confrontation with China. His replacement, Julian Gillard, had no hesitation about lining up with Washington. And we can look back now on the momentous events of 2010 with the benefit of hindsight. It is now clear why the Labor government of Julian Gillard denounced the publication of US military and diplomatic leaks by WikiLeaks as, quote, illegal activity. It is clear why the Labor Party government at the time immediately declared that it would not defend Assange, but instead would assist Washington to prosecute him. The Labor government was in the process of aligning Australia fully with US plans for an economic and military offensive to try and prevent China emerging as a rival or a challenge to American and Australian strategic and corporate influence in Asia. Labor, no less than Obama's administration, was hostile to WikiLeaks, hostile to an organisation that fiercely published leaked information that exposed the conspiracies and intrigues and the underlying predatory nature of the US-Australia military alliance. In November 2011, after throwing Julian Assange to the wolves, Julia Gillard and Labor committed Australia to the US pivot to Asia, the stationing of US Marines in Darwin, and massive increased operations by US aircraft and ships from Australian bases.
Imperialism!
Her government set in motion a massive Australian military build-up, committing tens of billions to be spent on jet fighters, submarines and other warfighting assets. That is why Australian officials did nothing to assist Julian Assange as he fought through the British courts against manufactured allegations of sexual assault and the warrant to extradite him to Sweden, from where he could have been rapidly extradited onto the United States. Julian Assange was only forced to seek political asylum with the small South American country of Ecuador because the government of his own country threw him to the wolves.
Good on you, Ecuador! Yay!
The coalition government that replaced Labor in 2013 continued and has expanded Canberra's alignment with Washington. And that is why it too has supported the ongoing persecution of Assange and WikiLeaks. In 2016, the coalition government refused to even issue a protest to Britain when the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention ruled that Assange's involuntary confinement in the Ecuadorian embassy in London was a, quote, deprivation of liberty and a, quote, violation of his human rights. Foreign Minister Julie Bishop instead signed a document which declared the following, that Australia was, quote, unable to intervene in the due process of another country's court proceedings or legal matters. And then she said, and we have full confidence in the UK and Swedish judicial system. This was a lie. The Australian government had at the time, in 2010, and it still has today, the undeniable diplomatic power and legal discretion under international and national law to intervene to defend an Australian citizen who is being unjustly treated by another government. In the case of Julian Assange, the issue is that the Australian government is refusing to exercise that diplomatic power and that legal discretion. It is instead supporting Washington's vendetta to have Assange hauled to the United States and put on a show trial on charges of espionage. Now at this rally, we are not asking Malcolm Turnbull to act on behalf of Julian Assange. We are telling him. We hold the Labour Party and the coalition parties responsible for all the outrages and harm that have been inflicted on Julian Assange, and we will hold them responsible for whatever happens to him now. They will be held to account by the working class of Australia. What is the situation as Julian Assange faces immense danger? The entire establishment has lined up against him because they have lined up completely with the US-Australia alliance. There is no criticism anymore in Australia of the alliance. No criticism of the fact that Pine Gap is where the United States targets its nuclear and cruise missiles. There is no criticism of the fact that Edward Snowden, backed by WikiLeaks, exposed that Australian intelligence agencies are up to their eyeballs in the global spying on the communications of hundreds of millions of people. And there is no criticism, no even discussion in ruling circles on the fact that in the US and Australian military and strategic circles, they are openly talking about preparing a war against China. We have come together today in the face of total silence, not just from the Coalition and Labor, but from the Greens, from Andrew Wilkie, from the trade unions, from the entire pseudo-left milieu in this country. They have lined up with Washington, so they have lined up in the efforts to break Julian Assange. The situation we face today is that if you dare even criticise the US alliance, it's considered tantamount to treason. While the establishment is silent on the persecution of an Australian citizen, the Australian political and media establishment is stoking up a nationalist and xenophobic witch hunt against reported Chinese interference and Chinese influence in Australia. The reality, of course, is the constant interference and influence over Australian politics by the United States.
Hold the money!
The ruling class of the United States.
The US
The World Socialist website and my party have stressed from the beginning, when we announced this rally some weeks ago, that a movement to defend Julian Assange is not going to be built by making appeals to the organisations who have abandoned him. It will be built by a fight to politically educate and independently mobilise the strength of the working class, the strength of ordinary people. What must be explained, and it must be explained to workers and young people, is that the attack on Assange, the attack on WikiLeaks, the attack on an independent media is an attack on them. The persecution of Julian Assange is a sharp expression of the campaign to censor and silence all opposition to social inequality, to state repression, and to the danger of war.
Big brothers here!
The international fight to defend democratic rights and defeat internet censorship and defend Assange and WikiLeaks are inseparable from and crucial to the fight to unite the people, the working class internationally, against the danger of war.
War's a record!
It is only through the unity of the working class, not the division of workers by racial or ethnic criteria, that democratic rights can be defended and the broader interests of the working class taken forward. To conclude, over the past 3 weeks, as we have promoted this rally and the vigils, important vigils which will be taking place on June 19th in London and numbers of other cities, we have revealed the extent of the support for Assange and WikiLeaks that exists in the working class in Australia and internationally. The establishment may have abandoned Julian Assange. Millions of ordinary people have not. What the Turnbull government does now, what the Labor Party does now, at this time when Julian Assange faces immense danger, is not going to be forgotten. From this rally, we have to turn out even more energetically to develop the widest discussion on the situation that faces Julian in the workplaces and factories, at the universities and TAFE colleges, and among the students in the high schools. We have to answer the continuous slanders and continuous lies that are told about him. Julian Assange must be free to unconditionally return to Australia if he chooses to do so, and WikiLeaks must be free to continue unhindered its work. I commit today that the Socialist Equality Party will continue to fight for that cause. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James, for that powerful address. We have two speakers, one from the International Youth and Students for Social Equality, and the second from the Committee for Public Education to address you briefly, and they will be followed by our final speaker, John Pilger, who I'm sure requires no introduction. Our next speaker then is Evrim Yazgin, President of the University of Melbourne International Youth and Students for Social Equality Club. Melbourne University is now host to Lockheed Martin, one of the major military manufacturers in the United States, and is the beneficiary of significant tertiary education funds. This is just an initial expression of the snowballing militarisation of university campuses around the world. The IYSSE is at the very forefront of the struggle against this extremely dangerous development. Please welcome Evrim Yazgin.
The International Youth and Students for Social Equality fully supports the fight to free Julian Assange. This is a decisive struggle for our generation. We have grown up amid a relentless barrage of pro-war lies and falsifications by the corporate media and all the parliamentary parties. The first political memory for many people my age was the US invasion of Iraq. Based on lies about weapons of mass destruction, the US and its allies, including Australia, launched an aggressive war for oil that killed up to 1 million people. The 2003 invasion set the model for every predatory war since, whether in Iraq, Syria, Libya, the Ukraine, Afghanistan, Africa, or the Asia Pacific. The media claims that the US and Australian governments are dropping bombs, waging war, and preparing military interventions out of humanitarian concern and for self-defense. WikiLeaks and Julian Assange acted in direct opposition to this war propaganda. The collateral murder video, the Iraq and Afghan war logs, and the hundreds of thousands of diplomatic cables published by WikiLeaks have opened the eyes of millions of young people to the brutal reality of imperialist war. WikiLeaks has contributed to the politicization of an entire generation. At the beginning of 2011, hundreds of thousands of young people took part in protests that toppled the Ben Ali regime in Tunisia. Many of them had read cables published by WikiLeaks exposing the corruption of the regime and its close ties to the US. Representatives of the US government warned that this was the first WikiLeaks revolution. Weeks later, Egyptian youth and workers rose up and overthrew the Mubarak regime in Egypt. They were influenced by cables published by WikiLeaks exposing the government's torture programs, the billions of dollars it had looted from the people, and its intimate ties to the CIA and the US military. The impact of WikiLeaks is global. WikiLeaks collaborated with Edward Snowden, who revealed that the US National Security Agency and its partners in the Five Eyes, including Australia, were spying on all of us through our computers and phones. Last year, WikiLeaks published Vault 7, demonstrating that the CIA is the biggest purveyor of malware in the world. Everywhere, young people face a future under capitalism of war, authoritarianism, poverty, and unemployment. The ruling elite knows that these conditions produce mass social struggles of students and youth. Their response is to try and suppress the truth. By persecuting Julian Assange, they want to intimidate young people and silence mass anti-war sentiment. They are terrified of WikiLeaks because they know, as Leon Trotsky, the great Russian revolutionist, once said, that the truth is revolutionary. It is up to us to demand freedom for Assange. The IYSSC is oriented to the working class, fighting to mobilize students and youth and young people all around the world. Our international movement is raising the defense of Assange with thousands of students in India, Sri Lanka, the US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and throughout Europe. Over the coming months, we must intensify our campaign and fight to build an international movement of the working class against war, austerity, and dictatorship. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Our next speaker is Sue Phillips. Sue is a highly experienced teacher, having taught in Victorian primary and secondary schools for 37 years. She is the national convener of the Committee for Public Education, which seeks to unite teachers, both nationally and internationally, in the struggle for public education as a social right for all young people.
On behalf of the Committee for Public Education, we would like to state our opposition to the malicious and anti-democratic treatment of the courageous whistleblower Julian Assange. The attack on Assange is not an isolated incident, but part of a global assault on the basic and fundamental rights of young people and the working class. The criminal role of the Australian, US, Swedish and now Ecuadorian government is at peace with the general assault on freedom of speech, internet censorship and the drive to war. In fact, the very same governments of Trump, May and Turnbull, desperate to silence Assange, are also carrying out a relentless assault on the right of students and educators to a fully resourced public education. As universities everywhere are being corporatised and militarised, academic freedom and free speech is being threatened. In public schools, teachers and students are being subordinated to business interests through high-stakes testing, the narrowing of the curriculum, and the never-ending assault on teachers' conditions. The vast majority of students no longer have the basic social right to a fully resourced, high-quality, enlightened education, which lies at the very foundation of a democratic society. The right of students to participate in an education system that facilitates the development of critical thinkers, curiosity, creativity and intellectual debate, that encourages students to express their opinions and ideas is being eliminated. What governments and business fear are the emergence of a new generation of Julian Assanges or Edward Snowdens, young men who have shown great courage and principle to speak out and to expose the truth. What business and government is demanding is a generation of working class youth educated in the spirit of passivity, conformity and obedience, to acquire only the most basic skills. In other words, to be work ready for the military or the mind-numbing, low-paid jobs. Last week, teachers and education support staff at Footscray City College in Melbourne passed a resolution endorsing this rally here today and demanding the Turnbull government extend to Assange the rights that should be available to him as a citizen and secure his return to Australia with guarantees against indictment and extradition to the US. That resolution has provided a political lead to educators internationally, expressing the sentiment of millions of students and teachers and academics who over the last 6 months have shown great determination, taking strike action to defend wages and working conditions in public schools and against casualisation in universities. Their action against growing social inequality is at the forefront of an international upsurge in the class struggle, a movement that is critical for Assange's freedom. In February and March this year, 30,000 teachers and educators in West Virginia took strike action against poverty-level wages, for decent health care and against the deplorable conditions in working-class schools. The 9-day strike was initiated by teachers through social media and initially outside the unions who were desperate to stifle the strike and block unified action across the state. Through the internet, Facebook and social media, teachers were able to discuss, share information, organise protest action and communicate with educators across the country and internationally. The ability to act and organise independently outside the control of the official organisations has struck fear into governments, the unions and the high-tech companies such as Google and Facebook that are at the centre of a bogus campaign of so-called fake news and Russian meddling. Their aim is to censor and outlaw political dissent. Although the unions managed to sell out and end the West Virginia strike, the rebellion of educators continued to spread to Oklahoma, Kentucky, Arizona, across the US, inspiring teachers globally. Thanks to the continued and detailed coverage by the World Socialist website and the intervention of the Socialist Equality Party in the United States, we here were able to learn of the West Virginia strike, to see the commonality of our struggle with them, and to express resolutions of international solidarity. Without the World Socialist website, teachers here in Australia would not have known about the strike due to a conscious blackout by the official media.
Fake news!
The right of teachers, students and workers to freedom of speech, to access independent information and uncensored internet, to be able to communicate, discuss, debate and organise is a basic social right. The defence of Assange's democratic rights is intimately bound up with the rights of students, educators and the working class as a whole. Educators internationally must stand with and for Julian Assange's release. We call on teachers and students to take leaflets demanding the freedom of Assange and circulate them as widely as possible at your workplaces, universities and schools, and pass resolutions defying the silence surrounding Assange's release. Thank you, Sue. The final speaker today is journalist and filmmaker John Pilger. From the very outset, John Pilger was one of the first to recognise the significance of WikiLeaks as a counterweight to the increasingly corporatised and sanitised establishment media. Since the persecution of Julian Assange escalated in late 2010, John Pilger has remained at the forefront of his defence. John is on the board of the Courage Foundation, an important international organisation committed to the defence of all journalists and whistleblowers who have come under attack by governments and state authorities. His most recent documentary, The Coming War on China, exposes what were behind the scenes but are now increasingly open plans and preparations by the United States for a war against China. A war that would carry the danger of escalation into a nuclear catastrophe. This rally has been organised, publicised and built with John's active support, for which we extend to him our sincerest thanks. Please give him a very warm welcome.
Thank you for coming for Julian, and thank you to the SEP for organising this very important
Put the microphone
rally.
up.
The persecution of Julian Assange must end. Or it will end in tragedy. The Australian Government and Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull have an historic opportunity to decide which it will be. They can remain silent, for which history will be unforgiving. Or they can act in the interests of justice and humanity and bring this remarkable Australian citizen home. Julian does not seek special treatment. The Australian government has clear diplomatic and moral obligations to protect its citizens abroad from gross injustice. In Julian's case, from a gross miscarriage of justice and the extreme danger that await him should he walk out of the Ecuadorian embassy in London unprotected. We know from the Chelsea Manning case what Julian can expect if a US extradition warrant is successful. The United Nations has called it torture. I know Julian well. I regard him as a close friend, a person of extraordinary resilience and courage. I've watched a tsunami of lies and smear engulf him endlessly, vindictively, perfidiously, and I know why they smear him. In 2008, a plan to destroy both WikiLeaks and Julian was laid out in a secret document dated 8th of March 2008. The authors were the Cyber Counterintelligence Assessment Branch of the US Defense Department. They described in detail how important it was to destroy, and I quote, the feeling of trust that that is WikiLeaks' center of gravity. This would be achieved, they wrote, with threats of exposure and criminal prosecution, and an unrelenting assault on reputation. The aim was to silence and criminalize WikiLeaks and its editor and publisher. It was as if they planned a war on a single human being and on the very principle of freedom of speech. Their weapon would be personal smear and their assassins will be journalists. The very people who are meant to keep the record straight and tell us the truth.
Fake news, God!
The irony is that no one has told these journalists what to do. I call them Vichy journalists, after the treacherous Vichy government that served the German occupation of wartime France. I've been a journalist for many years. I've never known such corruption of my craft. It is as if a world of illusions has consumed the last vestiges of honest media in the cause of decaying power, its wars and witch hunts. Let me give you one example. Last October, the ABC journalist Sarah Ferguson interviewed Hillary Clinton, over whom she fawned as I quote, the icon of your generation. This was the same Clinton who threatened to obliterate Iran and who, as US Secretary of State in 2011, was one of the instigators of the invasion and destruction of Libya as a modern state with the loss of 40,000 lives. Like the invasion of Iraq, it was based on lies. When the Libyan president was murdered publicly and gruesomely with a knife, Clinton whooped and cheered. Thanks largely to her, Libya became a breeding ground for ISIS and other jihadists. Thanks largely to her, tens of thousands of refugees fled in peril across the Mediterranean, and many of them drowned.
She's a criminal, John!
In leaked emails, published by WikiLeaks, we know that Hillary Clinton's foundation received millions of dollars from Saudi Arabia and Qatar the main backers of ISIS and terrorism across the Middle East. From these disclosures, we know that as Secretary of State, Clinton approved the biggest arms deal ever, $80 billion worth. Today, Saudi Arabia is using these weapons to crush the starving and stricken people of Yemen. Sarah Ferguson, a highly paid ABC reporter, raised not a word of this, with Hillary Clinton sitting in front of her. Instead, she allowed Clinton to attack and smear Julian Assange as, and I quote, a tool of Russian intelligence and a nihilistic opportunist who does the bidding of a dictator. Julian was offered no right of reply to this shocking interview, this orgy of defamation broadcast by Australia's publicly funded state broadcast.
Follow the money!
As if this wasn't enough, Ferguson's executive producer, Sally Neighbour, followed the interview with a vicious retweet. Assange is Putin's bitch. We all know it. This is what I mean by corruption. This is what I mean by fishy journalism. It was an insult to the very meaning of journalism. There are many other examples. The Guardian, reputedly once a great liberal newspaper, has conducted a vendetta against Julian Assange. Like a spurned lover, The Guardian has aimed its personal, petty, inhuman and cowardly attacks at a man whose work it once published and profited from. It is as if Julian has been declared fair game and too poor to sue for defamation. The former editor of The Guardian called the WikiLeaks disclosures, which his newspaper published in 2010, one of the greatest journalistic scoops of the last 30 years. Awards were lavished on the paper as if Julian did not exist. WikiLeaks revelations became part of The Guardian's marketing plan to raise the newspaper's cover price. They made money, often big money, while WikiLeaks and Julian struggled to survive.
It's all about the money,
With not a penny going to WikiLeaks, a hype Guardian book led to a lucrative Hollywood movie deal. The book's authors, Luke Harding and David Lee, gratuitously abused Assange as a damaged personality and callous. They also revealed the secret password Julian had given The Guardian in confidence and which was designed to protect a digital file containing the US Embassy cables. With Julian trapped in the Ecuadorian embassy, Luke Harding of The Guardian, who had made big bucks on the back of Julian and Edward Snowden, stood among the police outside the embassy and gloated on his blog that Scotland Yard may get the last laugh. This is how far the craft of journalism has sunk. Fishy journalism. The question is why? Julian Assange has committed no crime. He has never been charged with a crime. The Swedish episode was bogus and farcical, and he has been vindicated. Karen Ackelson and Lisa Longstaff of Women Against Rape summed it up when they wrote, and I quote them, "The allegations against Assange are a smokescreen behind which a number of governments are trying to clamp down on WikiLeaks for having audaciously revealed to the public their secret planning of wars and occupations and their attendant rape, murder and destruction. The authorities care so little about violence against women that they manipulate rape allegations at will," unquote. Most of this truth Most of this truth was lost or buried in a media witch hunt that disgracefully associated Julian with rape and misogyny. The witch hunt included voices who described themselves as on the left and as feminist. Shame on them. Throughout this smear campaign, the threat of Julian's extradition to a hellhole in the US was willfully ignored. Documents released by Edward Snowden showed Julian to be on what is called a manhunt target list. One leaked memo, official memo, reads as follows, and I quote, "Assange is going to make a nice bride in prison. Screw the terrorists, he'll be eating cat food forever." In Alexandria, Virginia, the suburban home of America's war-making elite, a secret grand jury, a throwback to the Middle Ages, has spent 7 years trying to concoct a crime for which Julian Assange can be prosecuted. But this isn't easy, because the US Constitution protects publishers, journalists, and whistleblowers. Julian's crime is that he broke a silence. No investigative journalism in my lifetime can equal the importance of what WikiLeaks has done and the public service it has provided in calling rapacious power to account. Julian and WikiLeaks have pushed back a one-way moral screen to reveal that imperialism, our imperialism, the often disguised imperialism of liberal democracies, is never benevolent or moral as it contrives to appear, as it's presented so often in the media, but committed to endless warfare, to the conquest of our resources, our lives, our dignity, if we allow it. When Harold Pinter, the great playwright, accepted the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2005, he referred to a vast tapestry of lies upon which we feed. He asked why, and I quote, "the systematic brutality, the widespread atrocities, the ruthless suppression of independent thought of the Soviet Union was well known in the West, while American imperial crimes, quote, never happened. Even while they were happening, they never happened." He was referring to the Great Silence. Julian and WikiLeaks have smashed this silence and exposed how the imperial game is played by those with liberal pretensions. Their revelations have lifted the mask of those who regard whole nations in terms of their usefulness or expendability. And that is why his life is in danger.
They're criminals, John!
7 years ago, here in Sydney, I arranged to meet a prominent Liberal member of the Federal Parliament, Malcolm Turnbull. I asked him to deliver an urgent appeal from Julian's lawyer to the government of Julia Gillard. Turnbull and I talked for several hours about Julian and his right to justice. He seemed sympathetic. We also talked about Turnbull's famous victory in the 1980s, when as a young lawyer he had fought the British government's attempts to suppress free speech and prevent the publication of the book Spycatcher, in a way a WikiLeaks of the time, for it revealed the crimes of great power. When I met Turnbull, the Labour Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, had declared WikiLeaks illegal and wanted to cancel Julian's passport, in effect his birthright, until she was told she couldn't do it. She was told by the AFP she couldn't do it, that Julian had committed no crime, that WikiLeaks was a publisher whose work was protected under Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which Australia was one of the original signatories. In abandoning Julian Assange, an Australian citizen, and colluding in his persecution, Gillard's outrageous behaviour forced the issue of Julian's recognition under international law as a political refugee. Tiny Ecuador invoked the 1951 convention and granted Julian refuge in the embassy in London. There was no question under international law that his life was in danger. Julia Gillard has recently been appearing with Hillary Clinton as pioneering feminists. It's reassuring to know that political satire is back. In these gigs, Gillard has not referred to her distinction as the first Prime Minister on whose watch Australian soldiers were killed in Afghanistan. We know from WikiLeaks war logs the atrocious nature of that imperial war in Afghanistan. If there's anything to remember Gillard by, it is a sycophantic, embarrassing speech she made to the US Congress soon after she demanded the illegal cancellation of Julian's passport. Is that how we'll remember Malcolm Turnbull? Julian's father has written to Malcolm Turnbull just the other day. It is a moving letter in which he has appealed to the Prime Minister to bring Julian home. He refers to the real possibility of a tragedy. I have watched Julian's health deteriorate in the years of confinement without sunlight. He has a relentless cough, but is denied safe passage to and from a hospital for even an X-ray. The Australian government has the diplomatic power to intervene. For years, the governments in Canberra offered no help to Julian. Now the responsibility of the Turnbull government could not be clearer. It goes to the very heart of human justice and morality. Malcolm Turnbull can remain silent, or he can seize the opportunity and fulfil his government's obligations and defend the life of a man who is a true Australian hero. He can bring Julian Assange home. The choice is his. Thank you.
Thank you very much to John Pilger. That was a very powerful, moving and truthful speech. And I don't think there's a better way to conclude this rally. We hope and intend that this is not some one-off event. This is the beginning and will give a powerful impetus to the development of the campaign necessary to free Julian Assange, to defend WikiLeaks, and to safeguard all the most fundamental democratic rights of the working class and of journalists who are committed to spreading information and the truth. We urge you to stay behind if you wish to discuss how this campaign can develop further. We're keen to hear the ideas of everyone here and to collaborate in the next stage of this campaign. As part of a global demonstration of support for Julian Assange, vigils will be held in 2 days, that is Tuesday, June 19, in London and in cities around the world, including in Sydney and Melbourne. You can find the details of these vigils on the internet. We encourage you to attend them, and we also invite you to sign up here to receive further information on future events and to assist us in preparing them. One final point. I would like to conclude by appealing to you to make a strong donation to help us finance the logistical costs of this event and to put us in a strong position to prepare other such events in the coming period in the ongoing struggle in defence of Julian Assange. There are people here with buckets. They have Julian Assange or SEP on those buckets for you to put donations in. If you want to make a credit card donation, we have forms that you can fill out to give us the necessary information. There are also pamphlets available here on Julian Assange. A number of articles have been brought together from the World Socialist website detailing the evolution of the persecution of Julian Assange from 2010 right through to the past week. Those pamphlets are $5 and we urge you to purchase one and study the processes that John Pilger just explained so powerfully. Finally, I'd like to thank you all very much for your attendance. It's been a cold day and most people have stayed throughout. We also have t-shirts, they're $15. Just walking down the street in one of those t-shirts can really inform people and remind them of what the media is attempting to silence. That Julian Assange faces immense dangers and it's up to us and millions of others to insist and demand his defence and freedom. So these t-shirts are available over here as well. I'd like to thank you all again very much for attending and I wish you a safe journey home. But stay behind if you wish to have a discussion. Thank you.